My name is Erin Green, and this is my final project for OGL 554 Learning and Development in Organizations with Dr. Megan Todd. This project is focused on training within the Special Olympics organization. The Special Olympics reaches 5.4 million athletes and 920,000 unified partners throughout 193 countries. The organization strives for an inclusive world for all, driven by the power of sport, through which people with intellectual disabilities live active, healthy, and fulfilling lives. The mission of the Special Olympics is to provide year-round sports training and athletic competition in a variety of Olympic-type sports for children and adults with intellectual disabilities, giving them continuing opportunities to develop physical fitness, demonstrate courage, experience joy, and participate in a sharing of gifts, skills, and friendship with their families, other Special Olympics athletes, and the community. The most recent strategic plan for the organization was created in 2021 to focus on the next 4 years. In this time frame, the Special Olympics aims to improve and expand local activities, empower athletes, youth, and other leaders to make a change, and grow inclusive practices and activities. To achieve this, their strategy is to digitize the movement, increase and expand revenue, build a brand, and promote excellence. The goal is for these outcomes to lead to long-term results where athletes will have better physical well-being, skills, fitness, and health. Athletes, teammates, families, and volunteers have better social and emotional well-being. People without disabilities become more inclusive, and organizations are more inclusive through the work of Special Olympics and the influence of others. Unfortunately, many people with intellectual disabilities cannot achieve their leadership potential because of the attitudes, behaviors, and low expectations of people without disabilities. So, how do we reach the long-term goal of inclusivity? Through unified leadership. In the past year, the Special Olympics introduced a unified leadership program. The unified leadership approach teaches leaders to value and learn from people with intellectual disabilities and make changes that create environments where people with ID can get opportunities to have meaningful jobs and roles. The approach aims to help people without disabilities turn from unconscious bias to conscious inclusion, changing their attitudes and behaviors to create meaningful inclusion in their teams, organizations, families, and community. With proper implementation of the program, unified leadership can provide external credibility to the organization, highlight how leaders without disabilities have a crucial role in changing the situation, and support the organization's aim of being an athlete-led movement. This aligns with the Special Olympic organization's strategic outcome to empower athletes, youth, and other leaders to make a change. The organization expects to educate 5,000 internal and external leaders to be unified leaders and to engage 250 companies and organizations. So a needs assessment was conducted to determine if training on the Unified Leadership Program would benefit the organization, who would be involved in the training, and what the objective of the training would be. Based on the recent needs assessment, only 16% of employees stated they were familiar with the Unified Leadership approach, enough to adopt it and teach it to others, and 91.7% of employees pointed out they would like more training on their approach. To benefit the organization, a training program is designed to educate all employees in the Special Olympics organization on the program and to teach leaders how to continue educating and coaching their employees to use the approach. This is done through the 3-part series. Part 1 of the 3-part series is an informative panel session. The intent is to introduce unified leadership, promote engagement. Part 2 is a management workshop. This is set to set intentions for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and aim to continue education to staff. The third part is the partnership meeting. This involves executives in the organization and key partners. Its aim is to create inclusion strengthening goals and plans for the organizational long-term change. By the end of the series, Special Olympics employees will define what unified leadership is and describe its role in the Special Olympics, identify barriers to inclusion Special Olympic athletes face, describe how the unified leadership approach can impact the Special Olympics organization, inventory their own biases and indicate where their own biases may prevent Special Olympics from taking place, and develop 3 strategies to educate others on the unified leadership approach. Today, we'll be focusing on part 2 of the part 3 series, Management Workshop. The curriculum analysis includes a pre-training, training event, and post-training. In the pre-training, participants will be given a course overview. They'll be provided with information on what to be prepared with as far as knowledge, materials, etc. The prerequisites are that they must be in a management level position and have attended part 1 of the 3-part series. In the training event, they'll follow a 4-hour schedule and an agenda will be provided. The course will take place through a virtual presentation, but with a facilitator on site for the interactive activities. We'll use a combination of methods to capitalize on each method's strength for learning and transfer. Equipment needed includes presentation, tables and chairs, whiteboards, sticky notes, cell phones, and refreshment. A formative evaluation will take place in the post-training. This will take place to measure reaction outcomes and cognitive outcomes. It will initially help me, the trainer, determine if the participants in each training session learn the information and get a feel for the overall satisfaction of the participants. It will ensure the training program is well organized and runs smoothly and that trainees learn and are satisfied. The evaluation will include statements such as the material received during the course was useful, the facilities and equipment made it easy to learn, and this will be included as an example at the end of this project. The objectives for this module are to describe how the unified approach can impact the Special Olympics organization, indicate barriers to inclusion Special Olympic athletes face, infer how their own biases may prevent unified leadership from taking place, and practice using the unified leadership approach. These objectives aim to follow a cognitive theory of transfer. They will link what they encounter in the work environment to the learned capability. This training encourages the trainees to consider potential applications of the training content to their job. Objective 1, describe how the unified leadership approach can impact the Special Olympics organization. This will be achieved by a quick review of part 1 of the educational series. Learners will recall what the unified leadership approach is and apply it to the mission of their organization. The first 15 minutes after the introduction will be a presentation with a recap on what unified leadership is. Learners will be allowed to discuss the approach's impact. They'll then be provided with this QR code that will lead them to a knowledge check. Participants will be able to complete the knowledge check and the results will be shared. As a group, we'll discuss the results that were shared and answer any questions. I'll transition back to the informative slides and review the impact from an organizational perspective. Then we transition into Objective 2. The information will shift to the organization's barriers to achieving the goal of unified leadership. I'll share information on the statistic of bias experienced within the Special Olympics and define unconscious versus conscious bias and prevalence. For example, assuming athletes with disabilities are less able in their education or careers or sport is a common bias. Unintended bias or unconscious bias refers to stereotypes or beliefs that affect our actions. Then, each participant will be given 3 sticky notes, yellow, green, and blue. They'll write a statistic on yellow, an example of biased behavior on green, and questions they want answered on blue. They'll stick their notes on the whiteboard. I will then select volunteers or pick people to come up and read notes from the whiteboard. When questions are asked, participants are encouraged to share their experiences. Adult learning is successful when learners can share experiences and learn from others. Following this activity, participants are dismissed for a 15-minute break. Before they're dismissed, I'll prompt them to begin thinking of a time they experienced bias, either giving or receiving it. When participants return from break, they'll be split into small groups. Small groups will be made pre-selected by me before break. The groups will be given a prompt to think of one situation in which they displayed bias or experienced it. Essentially, each group will be creating their own case study. The example of the prompt here is to think of a situation in which you displayed bias or experienced it. 1, how could this prevent unified leadership from taking place? And 2, how could the situation have been handled using the unified leadership approach? Each group will share their stories. I'll then go back to my presentation to go over data and facts on the barriers the organization faces and ways we overcome them. Part 3. This is where we'll practice using the unified leadership approach. This will be done through a role-playing activity. Sufficient background information was addressed over the course of this lesson, and I'll explain the purpose of and context for the role play. The group will be divided into groups of 3. This time, they'll each be given a written scenario in which they need to, as a group, role-play how to overcome bias and promote the unified leadership approach. A script will be provided with enough detail for trainees to understand their roles. Each group will be assigned a manager, a staff or volunteer, and an athlete. You can see here an example of what a role-play scenario might be. Groups will then present their role-play scenario and provide a verbal explanation for the strategies they used. They'll also receive feedback from their peers using a feedback form that looks similar to this. We finally get into the debrief, where any questions that participants still have are able to be asked. I'll go over some of the key takeaways. Takeaway 1, describe how the unified leadership approach can impact the Special Olympics organization. We are able to describe the way unified leadership can impact the organization. The approach leaders and teachers value and learn from people with intellectual disabilities. It can drive business through innovation in products and services. We were able to uncover barriers to inclusion Special Olympic athletes face. Many of you were able to provide examples of bias you have seen in the organization and recall statistics on inclusion. You were able to take inventory of your own biases and how those may prevent unified leadership from taking place. We were able to share experiences and learn from each other while discussing potential outcomes using the unified leadership approach. Finally, you were successfully able to use the unified leadership approach. Please remember to review the feedback your peers gave you on the role-play scenario. In all, the purpose of the work we did here today was to learn a little bit more about the unified leadership approach, learn from your own biases, and feel confident in using this approach with your staff and athletes, ultimately leading to the long-term strategic outcomes for people without disabilities to become more inclusive and to empower athletes, youth, and other leaders to make a change. The participants will be provided with this QR code that will take them to a post-training survey, as mentioned earlier in this project. Here's an example of what the training survey will look like. The first one is to evaluate the satisfaction of the training. So it'll ask questions such as the training environment was conducive to my learning, the trainer came prepared and was organized, the activities were helpful, engaging, pointless, confusing, other. How could any of the activities be improved? The level of the subject matter, and overall satisfaction. This will give the trainer an idea of the overall satisfaction of the training program. Section 2 is the knowledge assessment. This will help the trainer know if any of the information was retained. It'll ask questions such as, I feel confident teaching the unified leadership approach to my staff. I can recognize my own bias and biased behaviors of others towards the Special Olympics athletes. I can use the content I learned today and apply it to my current role. They're able to select any areas they feel they still need more training in, and then the biggest takeaway from the learning. The manager feedback form will actually be sent out 2 months following the training. This unified leadership approach is a program that heavily impacts the athletes and employees of the organization, so ongoing coaching and feedback is crucial. Managers will be able to observe their staff using the unified leadership approach and then respond to prompts and questions such as, I've noticed a positive attitude shift when I observe my employees working with the athletes. They'll be able to describe it briefly. My athletes are responding better to their coaches and volunteer staff. Again, a quick explanation. And they can give the trainer and executives a better idea of the amount of staff who are actually using the approach. Here are some of the references I used to complete this project. And thank you so much for listening.